Okay, hello. As you can see, this short video is about adding users at the command line to your Ubuntu system. So let's have a look. Here, as you can see, I am logged on to my system as a regular user. Notice I opened a terminal, and my terminal prompt should never log on as root. That's a bad habit that Windows got people doing. Least privilege, least privilege. In any case, so I am logged on as a regular user. It happens to be administrator because that's the only one I have, and my prompt shows me that I am on. I'm a regular user. I've got the $sign. So I want to add users. So again, this is an administrative task. So to do an administrative task, I have to have some root privileges. So I'm going to switch into root privileges using sudo-i. Now, I recently have done this, so it didn't ask me for my password, but if it does ask me for a password, it's asking for the password for the current user. So it wants the password of administrator to know if it can become root. It's the nice thing about sudo, you need your own password only, provided you've been given access. So right now I'm switched to root, and my prompt changed, and I have the £sign. So the £sign, again, that's a notice to you that you have to be careful. Whoops, sorry. I'm just trying to read my, my script. So what I want to do is I want to add a user. So let's say I am the student Sue Black. So Sue Black is a famous computer scientist in the UK. Very interesting computer scientist. So I'm Sue Black, and I want to add a user ID. I'm in the class for me, and I want to add a user ID for myself. So what I do is I type add user. Oops. Sue. So it's going to give me a bunch of prompts, so it's asking me for my password. So let's give it a password. You have to remember the password. And the full name is Sue Black. Room number, that's not applicable. Work phone, not applicable. Home phone, not applicable. Other. Technically, scientist, did I spell that right? Technically, you don't need to, you can just hit enter on all of these, but why not? And yes, the information is correct. I say yes. So that's done. So now I have the user Sue. So what I want to do, I have a user for myself, Sue. What I want to do is I want to make sure that this user, this is an administrative user. So I want them to have sudo access. So the way that I do that is by using usermod. So with usermod, well, add user is pretty self-explanatory, and usermod, I guess, is also self-explanatory. We changed users. So if I look at the man page for usermod, what I want to do is I want to add, in order to become a sudoer on Ubuntu, you have to be added to the sudoer groups. So we're going to talk about this more next week, but users are always created with a user ID and a default group ID, and then we can add them to other groups. So if I look in here, the group, here I have a group ID. I'm going to locate, so if I'm using, notice I'm using the VI locate group. So if I use the lowercase g, that will be the default or the initial logon group. So, and of course it has to exist. Any group has to exist. But if I use an uppercase g, that's a supplementary group. So I want to keep the group that I have right now, and I want to use a supplementary group. So I want to add this user to another group. So if I do an ID, Sue, it tells me that Sue's ID has an ID with a number of 1002. Here's a group ID with a 1002. And this is the only group that they're in. So I want to add Sue to have a supplementary group of sudo so that Sue can do sudo processes. Or me, I'm Sue. So what I do is I use usermod, the user ID. I use the capital G, because if I use the lowercase g, it's going to wipe out Sue, but I don't want to wipe that out. I want to have an extra one. And I add it to sudo. So now if I do ID with Sue, Sue also has the sudo groups. So now that she's in, that particular user is in sudo groups, they can use the sudo command to switch to root and do other things. So this is why I want to give them those privileges. So now that I've done this, I want to check that this user works. So I hope I remember the password, but now I'm going to, since I'm done here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit root. I'm finished doing what I wanted to do as root, so I get out of there right away. This is least privilege. So now, since I want to test it, I don't need root use to test it. So I just hit Control-L to clear the screen to the top. So what I want to do is I want to switch user to Sue. So I switch user. Always use the dash because the dash gives you the path of that user. So now in order to do this, switch user to this user, I can log off and log on again as Sue, but I want to just try using switch user. It's just because I can do it all in one command line. So I switch user. It's asking me for the password that I gave it. I hope I remember it. I did remember it. So what happened was I was able to log on as Sue using the password for Sue. So that's great. I know that Sue works with the password that I gave it, which happens to be something simple. So now, since I added Sue to the sudoers group, I get this prompt saying I can run a command using sudo. So I want to test that too to make sure that works. So let's see what happens if let's see if I try to do this. So the root user has a home directory of root. I get permission denied. But I should be able to see it if I use sudo. So here I'm going to use sudo ls root. Now notice it says actually it's asking for the password for Sue. So I'm testing Sue using sudo. I'm running as Sue and I'm testing Sue using sudo. So I give the password for Sue, 1, 2. Oops, I just gave away the password. So that's what's in the root directory. So I now know that it works. I'm not getting permission denied. So I've completely tested this user. I know that Sue can log on using the password that I gave it, and it can use sudoers. So I have finished for this user, and now I'm going to add the user for the teacher. So my user ID, Sue, I'm Sue Black. I'm going to add the user ID for the teacher, which is Tricia. The one thing I can look at too is if I tail, I see here I have the user ID for Sue, and then I can also tail the groups, where I will see I have the user ID for Sue. I can also grep to see, ID will tell me this, but I can grep for Sue in my group file, and there I see I have Sue is a member of sudo, and Sue itself is a group. So now this is complete and I can add another user. Oh, I can also check using who am I right now. So who am I is Sue. I'm logged on as Sue, but I also see that in the prompt. So there we go. Now I'm going to exit. So now since I've done a switch user, I have another session. So I want to exit back to my original session that I was running as administrator. So what I would do now is I would finish creating all my user IDs that I need. I'd create one for the teacher, and then I would log off as administrator and log on as one of those users. Well, I would log on as my user. So I'm Sue Black, I would log on as my user. And then the teacher can use, Tricia can use her own.